Okay, so um, we have successfully made this object um, be able to collide, right? So our player can collide with this object, and rather than bouncing off of it or even having the, its motion be changed in direction by hitting it, this thing is now a trigger, and so it can pass through it without any effects, but at the same time it picks up the item, right? And so now what we're going to do is um, we're going to we're going to take what we've been working on here and we're going to create something called a prefab. Now, what a prefab is it allows you to take any game object you've created here or any other game object that you've made, and it essentially saves it as an asset. Now, why would you want to do that? There's several reasons for this. One, having a prefab, if say you have, let's say this is, an enemy or whatever, it's a coin or something. It's something, in this case, it's something you pick up. Let's say you have, 1,000 pickups, it's like something in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise where there's just like rings everywhere, right? And so rather than copying and pasting this over and over and over again, right? Imagine you had 1,000 copies of this pickup somewhere off scattered throughout this world. And then you decided at some point that instead of being yellow, or instead of being the dimensions they currently are, because actually you can change the material and it'll change it across the whole thing. But let's say that you wanted these all to be twice as tall and half as wide as they currently are. And so you would have to select all 1,000 of those and change them all. Now you could select them en masse and do it, but that would still be a nightmare. So one of the benefits of a prefab is that you change the prefab itself, and it changes all the instances of the prefab, right? So it's sort of like you're changing a master copy, and that those changes propagate to every other instance, is what they call it, that's out there in the world. And so that's one of the big advantages to that. The other advantage is that right now these objects are basically in this scene, right? You can copy and paste one of these objects from a scene to another scene, but that's kind of obnoxious, and there's a lot of things that you just can't do with it that way. So one of the other nice things about a prefab is that it transmits from scene to scene, and really at this point where we've really just been working in one scene. But the idea with Unity is that if you're building a larger project, if you're doing a game or something, each level or maybe even a section of a level is a scene, right? And this makes it manageable in terms of building it, and also manageable just in terms of the number of models, the number of polygons, and everything that's in the scene at once. And so you ideally migrate from scene to scene. And so if you're going to have these same pickups throughout, like, say you're totally insane and you make 100 levels of some game where you're just picking up coins all the time, right? It would be being able to just have this prefab down in your assets. You can pull this thing up and just create new copies. So I'm actually going to delete this prefab here because I've made it, and I want to unmake it. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is we want to click on our project tab. We want to make sure we're in our assets folder. And right now there's not a prefabs folder, but that's typically where you put prefabs. So we're going to right click in space here. We're going to go to create folder, and I'm just going to call it prefabs. So PRE capital F ABS. And so now I've got this prefabs folder. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on that. This folder is empty, it tells me. That's wonderful to know. And so how do we create a prefab? Creating a prefab is really easy. All you do is you take the object that you want to have a prefab of, and you just click and drag it from your hierarchy down into your assets folder, and it's created a prefab of this object. Now, let's go ahead and just place a couple of these in the scene, right? We've already got one. And you might notice this is skinnier than it was previously, and that's because I actually changed it, but we'll change them all together here in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to pull a couple more prefabs out here. Now note, they're halfway through the floor. And so I'm going to go ahead and just pull these up a little bit. I don't honestly know if I hit reset on this. Okay, it zeroes it all the way down. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. So we want these to be, the big thing is y needs to be about 1.5 so there's no collisions with the floor. Right, and so I'll just make sure I'm somewhere close to that. It doesn't really matter. And honestly, these don't respond to gravity, so you could have these up a little bit higher up off the floor if you want to. Right, there's no need for them all to be at the same height. Right, we can always lift these up, and let's just go ahead and drop a few more in here. And okay, so I've got a few in my scene. Right, you can imagine if I had thousands. Something else you can do with prefabs is you can actually instantiate, which means to generate or create these on the fly. So you could have a, you could create a graph in Bolt that will instantiate or create, 1,000 of these randomly scattered throughout the world. Right, you could, and you want to do that at the start of the scene. But those are types of things that you can do with pickups. Now, the other thing, right, any change you make is going to be reflected in all the copies. This is really nice with the, right, if you need to make a behavior change based on one of your flow graphs, or maybe it's a state graph, which we haven't gotten into yet, and we will soon. Right, so maybe you need to make a change there. So let's go ahead and edit the graph. And right, we have this rotate Y option, and then we have our player collision over here. So maybe what we want to do is we want a change to occur when we hit these things. Let's say we don't necessarily want this object to be destroyed right away. We want it to stay on the screen a little bit longer than it does previously. Now, if these were each individual copies, and granted, this isn't the best example because we have a macro. So if I change the macro here, it's going to change it for all of them, for all the copies anyway. But let's just pretend this is a better example than I'm giving, right? That it's something that you can't change all of them at the same time. But so let's say that instead of this game object destroy, I want the one that allows us to set a timer on it. So I'm going to go ahead and right click, and I'm going to click on replace. And I'm going to go to game object. And I even just typing in game, I go down the list a bit, and there's the game object destroy, the object, and then this lowercase t, which that is the variable that determines the time. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And so now I have this time set. So I can say, okay, well, I really don't want this to be destroyed for, maybe it's 2 seconds after it gets set. So now that I've made that change, right, this will propagate to all the copies. If I go ahead and hit play, when I drive into this one, you'll note this is the one that I had selected first, right? So let's see if it takes it a couple seconds to disappear. Yeah, so you can see, right, it disappeared, but it took 2 seconds, which was probably too long. The reason you don't want things to disappear right away is, sometimes you want like a oh no, I got hit by an enemy animation to play, or you have some other, there's some other issue going on that you want to have play. So that would be why you're doing that. Now note that each one of these I pick up, I'm also getting an additional point on my score, right? I think I hit that one. Yep. Oh, and then I'm falling off into space. Okay, so each one of those, right, so that updated, but let's go ahead and click on let's go back down to our project pane and let's select our pickup. And I want you to note that some of the settings and things look very similar here, right? I could apply a tag to all of these. I don't need to do that right now, but I might in the future. I can, in terms of position here, if I make a change over here, right, it may update it in this, but it's not updating it in the world, right? That's one of the things that doesn't update because each one of these has a unique position in the world. But there's things like if I didn't want this, if I wanted to say whatever, turn these into, turn the box collider off for some reason, I could do that. Now, there are a bunch of settings that I can't change yet. And so let's click Open Prefab. Now when I do that, you'll see that I get this window, my scene window changes. I get this dark blue background, and that indicates that I'm editing a prefab. It's sort of like in Illustrator when if you've got a group of things and you double click to enter the group so you can edit the individual elements, and you get like a little special thing here, right? It's the same, right? It's telling me right now I'm in my scenes, I'm editing this pickup one prefab. And note, prefabs have a solid block on them, a solid blue block. That's their icon. So in this pickup, I've got this object. Now you'll note that this prefab could have many different objects in it, right? It just has one in its own little internal hierarchy now, and we'll change that in a second. But so when I'm in here, here's one of the places where, right, I can change the scale in this direction. And if I do that, you'll see all the copies change at once. Right. If I want to add a new, I'm going to shrink my material. If I want to add a new component, right, if there's some, I don't know, like let's say that I do want this to, when these get hit, I want them to flash red a few times before they disappear. Right. And so in order to do that, I'd need something that we haven't talked about yet called an animator. And so, right, I'm going to need an animator and an animation and all of those things attached to this in order for this to work. Or maybe I want these all to make sound. This would be a really great example. So let's go ahead and type in audio. And oh, if you spell it right, it'll work. AUDIO. Right, so there's a bunch of audio options in here, but let's go ahead and just make all of these audio sources. So I'm going to click audio source. Now, what this would be useful for, right, is if I want to add some sort of a pickup sound, like some sound that indicates that I hit this thing, right? Because right now I'm just solely relying on visual cues. And we're going to leave this on here. We're not actually going to talk about this right now, but we're going to come back in a little bit and I'll show you how to add audio sources to your scene. Now, the camera, by default, just as a heads up, already has an audio listener. And you can only have one audio listener in a scene unless you're doing like networked play, right? And then everybody's camera's its own audio listener, but we're not going to get into that right now. So we've got our audio source, but we don't have any, right? We don't have any sounds attached to it, and we don't have any audio clips available. We haven't added any. So I'll create an asset for you to add in a little bit, and we'll talk about some of these settings, but we're not going to go into like depth. It's a pretty, like the way they do audio is pretty interesting in Unity at this point. Okay, so I've got my audio source that I've added onto all of these, and let's go ahead and add a couple more objects in here. So I'm still in my prefab edit mode, so I'm just going to go to plus 3D object, and I'm going to I'll just create a sphere, and maybe I'll just move this up a little bit here, and leave it here. So now we haven't really talked too much about child objects yet, but this object is a child of the pickup, right? It's a child of this rectangle, and I'm just going to go ahead and leave these here. So one thing to note, this sphere does have the sphere collider on, and it's not a trigger right now. So if our object was to hit this sphere, it would actually collide with the sphere, right? And so we could either turn the collider off, or we could just say is trigger. And that would basically leave it on, but make it so that, and maybe we want to use it so if your character jumps and hits the sphere, they get 2 points or something like that, rather than just a single point for hitting the cube. So, but we're not going to code that right now. We're just going to think about that as an option. Okay, so once I am done making any edits that I want to make to my prefab, I can either click on this arrow over here to go back to the scene, or I can just click here to go to my scene. You'll note that all of those changes have been applied. And then I can go ahead and run my scene, and you'll see that the sphere is going to spin as though it is permanently attached to that rectangle, right? And again, I have, these 5 copies. They still all work the same. Even if I jump at this point, I should hit it, right? And so so prefabs are pretty great. They're a really, really useful way to create assets and reuse them. Okay, so in this tutorial, we just finished making a prefab, but I wanted to go ahead and let's add some audio to it so you can learn how to add audio units. Now, if you don't know how to do something in Unity, Unity's manual is pretty good most of the time. There's points where, especially with Bolt, there's a lot of the visual, like the images that go with the text are missing. I don't know why. And so that's really frustrating, but I'm currently on version 2021.1. That's not what I want. I want 2020.1. Let's see. This will. Okay, here we go. Good. Yeah, I chose the wrong one. We're not using the beta version of the new version that's coming out yet. There are potential for like bad errors to happen in weird places, and it can be really frustrating when that happens. But we're going to focus on is audio. And so if I click on the audio section, it kind of gives me this, intro page and talks about spatial sound and like that I can have all of these, I can have like a full mixer in here, and there's all sorts of things that we can do. But initially what we really want to do is, if we click the overview, there's some basic theory. You can learn why these things are working. But the important thing is these are the audio file types that you can use in Unity, right? We can use this. This is like an Apple version. This is WAV, is uncompressed. If you can get a WAV file that is, they're larger, but they're uncompressed audio. They tend to play back faster. You don't have to decode them like you do with some of the other formats. But we're going to bring them in like we normally do. But so where do we find these audio files, or how do we record them, right? If you have a good microphone, or if you check one out from the College of Design Output Center, you can record high quality audio with those things in WAV format and then add them as sound effects in your sound. But if you're, especially for this project, for the first project, it might be easier to go to a website like, one of my favorite ones for sound effects is just I believe it's .org. Yep. Okay, and so freesound.org, you do have to log in, I believe, to download sounds. I'm just going to type in clank as in the search window. And so there are all of these options. Most of them are totally free to download. You'll notice some, like this one has a whole bunch of glass clanks. You can tell by the waveform if it's like a singular sound or if it's multiple sounds, right? And so if I run this one, you might have heard that. It's kind of cheesy. I kind of like that one better. Clank from 2 clay pots. Right, but people have all sorts of different things. So you can come on and I'm going to have one of these as an asset on Canvas, but you can also just come download whatever you want. So I'm going to click on here, and it says login to download. I have to remember my login information. I can't remember it, but I will try. Okay, so I've logged in, and then I just click download. Okay, so I downloaded it, but then Apple is annoying, and so it makes it so that QuickTime automatically opens the file, which shut off the screen recording. So here, I'm back. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and migrate that into Unity. And, if I was controlling where I was downloading things, I could just send it straight to my assets folder. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import it. So I'm back in my project. I'm going to click on Assets, and I'm just going to right-click here, and I'm going to say Import New Asset. Now, ideally, I'd have a folder for audio, for sounds as well, but I'm not going to do that right now. So then I just need to go to my Downloads folder, find the file that I just grabbed, and click Import. And you can see that the audio waveform comes up. And if you look over in the inspector, it kind of tells you some things, whether to load it in the background, force to mono. You have a few options here. I'm going to leave everything set to the default. If I want to hear it, right? I can hit the play button down here by the waveforms. If I want, I can turn play on and off. I can loop it if I want to, which I don't want to do any of those things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select one of my pickups, and then I'm just going to go ahead and if I double click on that, it'll zoom in. That's not what I wanted to do. If I go to my prefabs folder, wherever that went, there it is, and double click on it here, now I'm able to edit it. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up this audio source. And now if I click here, the only option I have is this file here, which could be better named, but that's fine. So I'm going to do that. Now, by default, this is set to play on awake. That is not what we want to do. We could try it right now, and basically what that means is as soon as I hit play and the game runs its first frame, all of these are going to make a sound. It's not going to make a sound when we collide with it, which is what we want. Note that we have the option to mute it. We can actually add effects. We'll talk about that much later in the semester. You can have different reverb zones in the world. We'll again talk about that later. You can loop the sound, right? We don't need to loop it, but this is useful if you have like a theme, like a track playing in the background that you want to loop as the player continues to play this. So we're just going to uncheck play on awake, and then priority we're going to leave it right dead set in the middle for now. What that means is basically if there's a bunch of sounds going on, and having something at a higher priority means that it's going to play as quickly as it possibly can, right? Because it takes a certain amount of time for every audio file to be loaded and play. There's certain sounds you're going to want to be more accurate in terms of timing than other sounds, right? And so like you might want the music to be a high priority so that the beat doesn't like wobble or warble or something like that, which would be noticeable. There's a volume slider, there's a pitch slider, which basically allows you to speed the track up a little bit and make it sound a little bit more chipmunky, or slow it down a bit and make it sound a little bit deeper. The stereo pan, right, you can have it either go right or left. Spatial blend, we're going to leave these at 2D right now, but when they're 3D, then you can have Doppler effects and all sorts of things happen. And so they're quieter the further away you are from the object, right? And in this case, we're always going to be right up against this thing. So 2D makes the most sense, and it's the fastest option. And then there's the roll-off is like, how does this sound get quieter? And we're not going to worry about that right now. The default should be fine. Okay, so we've got our audio source on, but nothing is going to happen right now. So what we need to do is we need to go into our flow machine and edit our graph so that when we have this collision occur, it plays this audio sound. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to right-click and type in audio and audio source. And specifically the one I want is audio source play. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And it should, right, this is the one that I want to play, is the one that's attached to this object. And I only want this to play, right, if this is happening, right, if this branch is true. So we could either have this play before the game object gets destroyed, but I think we should do it in the flow first. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to link it here. And then I'm going to go down and link this, because we know this object is going to, flicker at some point when we add an animator, which we'll do quite soon. Okay, so I've got this audio source in my chain of events. I shouldn't need anything else. And so now let's go ahead and hop back out to our scene level. Let's go ahead and save. This is a great time to save our project. And let's go ahead and hit play and see what happens, or hear what happens. I am going to increase my volume a bit, so hopefully you can hear this through the microphone. We'll see how it goes. Ooh, that was loud. I'm going to turn that down a touch. All right, but so you can hear that sound when I hit these, so maybe I can nudge my way back over here. And so apparently, right, I do have a little bit of more coding to potentially do. because if I just barely hit it while it's still spinning, I get more collisions and it plays over and over again. So that's something that I would have to fix. I honestly, it would take me some time to figure out how to do that in Bolt. So I'm not going to do that right at this second. But okay, so now, right? So we've got this. So now when we pick this up, we get a little knock sound. Now you could make it anything that you want to, but that is part of that. I'm going to go ahead and have this destroy just be half a second, so 0.5 instead of the full thing. And I'm going to pull this back down here so it fits within my group. Okay. All right, so now we can play our audio file when we collide with an object.